I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we work and recognize their continuing connection to the land, waters, and culture. We pay our respect to the elders, past, present, and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture, and the hope of their people. So thank you all for coming. We have a very interesting topic today, I think, and personally, I think it is extremely interesting. We're going to talk about from self to no self, and we have three very distinguished guests here. Uh, Kevin, our own, very own Kevin, and I will give you formal introductions for them just before they start talking. Yenyi, who's visiting from Taiwan, and Kai, who's also visiting from Taiwan. The issue we are going to be concerned with is how to move from the self to the no self. So all our experiences come with the sense of self, your thoughts, your actions. You think, you are here listening to this workshop. You will be having thoughts. But the Buddhists believe that this sense of self is the root of all suffering. And the point of the Buddhist path is to get rid of this sense of the self. That is, the ultimate aim, so to say. The worry is that getting rid of the sense of self is associated with a lot of pain. People who have, lost the sense of self often, go through symptoms of what you might call depersonalization, desomatization, not being able to identify with their body or their thoughts or their action. And it's actually quite debilitating. That pathology is quite debilitating. So what I want our distinguished guests to tell us is, how do we put this together with the Buddhist thought that getting rid of the sense of self is going to get rid of all suffering? We're going to start with Kevin, who is a Buddhist monk for 18 years in the Theravada Thai tradition. And we're very fortunate in M3CS because he's currently here with us as a PhD candidate, working on how meditation affects morality and how selfless experiences might influence our moral lives. Over to you, Kevin.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Monima. I might have an answer to your concern about the depersonalization. So obviously, thank you everybody for coming. Hopefully, this is going to be a fun discussion that we're going to have today. So obviously, the Buddhist monk is standing up here, and Buddhism is all non-self, no self. But I'm actually going to give a bit of an alternative perspective today. I'll talk a little bit about a position that's been around since the start of Buddhism, 2,600 years ago. There's been a debate about selves and no selves. So while I'm usually flying the no self banner, I'm going to put the banner down today, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about maybe how in Buddhism, and especially from the early Buddhist text perspective, these are the Pali Nikayas, the Chinese Agamas, maybe how the Buddha was maybe saying there's maybe room for certain kinds of skillful selves. So why is this an issue? Why is there a concern about selves and no selves? Well, one thing that's an important point to make is that the Buddha, when we look at the early Buddhist texts, he rejected actually answering any metaphysical interpretations about what a self actually is. It was one of the 10 questions that he just point blank refused to answer. He wouldn't even answer it. And when he was actually approached by somebody called Vajrakota the Wanderer, who asked him point blank, is there a self or is there no self? He just stonewalled him and didn't answer at all. I'm not sure you could get away with that these days, but yeah, he refused to answer him. And the reason he gave that he refused to answer these kinds of questions is because essentially the Buddha said that these things don't lead to the end of dukkha. These things just essentially entangle us in a thicket of views, he'd say. So the main aim of what the Buddha was trying to do in the early Buddhist texts is he's the only thing he's talking about is that there is dukkha, there is suffering, there is unsatisfactoriness, and the cessation of dukkha. That's all he was really concerned about. And essentially what he was always trying to point towards is what, when it's done by me, will lead to my long-term welfare and happiness. And this is long-term welfare and happiness here. What this means is nibbana. This means enlightenment. So the way, if the Buddha's main aim is for us to overcome suffering in some kind of way, what the argument is here is that what the Buddha's talking about when he's talking about not self is that he's relating it to the thing that causes us the most suffering, this kind of whole psychophysical phenomena that is me, my body. And in Buddhism, we call these the khandhas. This is the body, the feeling, perception, fabrication, consciousness. Basically to say that these are not mine, these are not myself, these don't actually belong to me. That's essentially the early Buddhist text position on what not self is. So this has led to a lot of people saying that, well, when the Buddha's talking about not self in these early Buddhist texts, what he's talking about is just that these psychophysical aggregates are not self. And there's room, they say that there's room for certain kinds of selves in the early Buddhist texts. So those certain kinds of selves, I'm going to call those skillful selves. And what a skillful self essentially would mean is the development of skillful qualities that one identifies with. And they give us the prerequisite conditions for actually overcoming dukkha. So it's a kind of positive sense of self in some way. So what kinds of selves and not selves are we talking about here? So to understand this position, we have to get back to axiomatic principles of what Buddhism's about. In Buddhism, we have dukkha, we have unsatisfactoriness, suffering, and we have nibbana, which is enlightenment, liberation. How you get between these two things is you have karma. And in an early Buddhist text perspective, karma is action. It's just simply action. And so we have skillful action that leads towards nibbana and unskillful action that leads further into dukkha. We call that kusala karma or akusala karma. Now, so if we're going to understand this position, it's when we're thinking about the early Buddhist text perception of self and not self, it has to be viewed as a kind of karma. It's an action of identification or disidentification with something. So where we're making some kind of perceptual inference about how phenomena is. We're either identifying it as a self or not identifying it as a self. So in this way, we have to think of the perception of self or not self as a kind of action, like a skillful action or an unskillful action. So from an early Buddhist text perspective, like in a sense, like we don't care. Like if there's self, is there no self? Is there a real self? Like we don't care. What the issue is, what kind of perception of a self is skillful and when is it skillful? And what kind of perception of self is skillful and when is it skillful? And how does that actually lead to our long-term welfare and happiness? Now, what are these skillful selves? Again, so the Buddhist canon is huge. You can cherry pick as much as you want. There's plenty of places there that say that there's a self, plenty of places there that say there's no self. This is just some of the passages that maybe some people lean on. So this is some of the Buddha's words on a positive sense of self. These come from something called the Dhammapada. It's called the Attavagga, which is basically the chapter on the self. And so one of the quotes here is, by oneself evil is done, by oneself one becomes defiled, by oneself evil is not done, by oneself one becomes purified. Purity and impurity depend on oneself. No one can purify another. So we can start to see this kind of skillful action leading or unskillful action leading in a particular kind of way, leading to nibbana or into dukkha. And here's one of the big ones is, by oneself one should censor self, by oneself one should be controlled. He who guards himself mindful will live happily. Self is the protector of self. Self is the refuge of self. Therefore, one should restrain oneself as a merchant his noble horse. So you can see there's an element here where the Buddha is actually talking about a sense of control in some way and a sense of self-reliance, that we have to be reliant on ourselves in some way. And finally, he also talked about, this is not in the Dhammapada, this is in the Anguttara Nikaya. He talked about self as a governing principle. Basically, this sutta says, as a monk, you don't ordain for fancy cars and all these kinds of things. You do it to gain enlightenment. So he reflects on this. My persistence will be aroused and not lax. My mindfulness established and not confused. My body calm and not aroused. My mind centered and unified. Having made himself his governing principle, he abandons what is unskillful, develops what is skillful. abandons what is blameworthy, develops what is unblameworthy, and looks after himself in a pure way. This is called the self as a governing principle. So we can sort of see here when we look at the early Buddhist text, maybe the Buddha is talking about some kind of self, but I guess the question comes up here is like, well, look, if he's talking about a self, and one of the big things in Buddhism is to abandon the sense of self, why would you build a sense of self to begin with then? Why would you build one of these skillful selves? And so the idea here is that essentially the path to enlightenment, it's a skill. It's a skill, it requires skillful actions. Skillful actions takes time. One time you're going to be doing one thing, at another time you're going to be doing another. The analogy here is like if you're building a house, you don't start by building the house by painting the thing. You actually have to start by clearing the foundation, putting the foundations up, putting the walls on, all these kinds of things. And all this time you're using different tools. You're picking up different tools and putting them down using different things. So these skillful actions, it takes time to master, and at different times we might do different things. Now, while the unconditioned, which is Nibbana, is the thing that we're going for, essentially what the argument is that actually the path to that is conditioned. It's all fabricated in some kind of a way. And it's a fabricated path that leads to an unfabricated goal. And to do that, we actually have to develop some kind of fabricated qualities. By fabricated here, I mean like we build something up, we bring something together, we do something in some way. And essentially we build some of these fabricated qualities up, and then we will eventually maybe start to let some of them go as we progress and we become more and more skillful. So again, so this fabricated path involves developing skillful and abandoning unskillful. And for this, you need some kind of drive. It's like, well, if not, why would you do it? I want to get to Nibbana. Like, I need some sort of motivation to do that. And that requires this skillful self, and essentially that your efforts are going to essentially lead to something. And when you get to this destination, you can put some of these things down. One of the main similes here is called the simile of the raft, where the Buddha basically said you get to this big, huge river and you need to get across the river. And when you get there, you see logs and vines and all these things lying around. So you make yourself a little raft, you get across the river, you paddle across or whatever. And then when you finally get to the other side, you don't go, this raft was awesome, I'm going to pick this thing up and I'm going to carry it on my head and continue on with it. No, you just leave the raft there. So this is what I mean by we need to do conditioned and fabricated things to get to the unconditioned. So how do we actually go about doing this then? This is where it gets a little bit contentious kind of thing, and this is where a lot of people diverge on this. So the idea here is that we use a certain kind of craving to get rid of our craving. And we use a certain kind of conceit to get rid of our conceit. That's a head scratcher, but so basically the self becomes this producer of intentions and actions that are leading one towards Nibbana. The idea here is that we use the khandhas, we use this psychophysical form in this way to develop things like generosity, to develop morality, to develop goodwill. There's this really nice passage in something called the Udana where the Buddha says, it's only if you love yourself, then you can finally actually love other people. You have to love yourself first. And especially for the development of what we call the jhanas, which are the meditative absorptions, is something that we really actually need, a quality that we need. And while you're doing this, you're developing this skillful self in this way, you're developing these skillful actions in this way, you're actually learning to identify with these decent, skillful qualities. And at the same time, you're actually disidentifying from unskillful qualities. So the idea here is if you're identifying with like generous qualities, you're actually learning to disidentify from selfish qualities as well. And so the idea now is once you take this skillful self as far as you can go, you realize that actually there's still some dukkha within that. There's still some unsatisfactoriness in that existence. So even like the absolute bliss of meditation, that's still impermanent. So then you actually start to put some of these things down in favor of going for a higher sense of happiness. You are progressing more and more towards Nibbana. And this is where we start to look at things that are beyond our control as, this is not mine, this is not myself, this is not what I am. And so when do we start to develop the perception of non-self? So you can be doing this the whole time. It's not like you have to get this thing first and then you do it. You can be developing this perception along the way. You can do it from day one, but it just works better. Like this is the idea. So we start to recognize that there's certain phenomena that are outside of our control. Again, the psychophysical aggregates that we actually have. I know there's a problem there. We said we could control the aggregates before in some way to develop those qualities, but now we're saying we don't control the aggregates. I know that, but let's just and we'll just plow on. So we start to recognize that, or we start to look at phenomena in this way that the khandhas are not self. So essentially what the idea here is that the perceptual inference of not self, it's a strategy to develop what we call samaditi, of right view. And what right view is a right view in relation to the Four Noble Truths. We have to realize that there's suffering. We have to abandon craving, and we have to realize the cessation of suffering. And so in Theravada Buddhism, we have many levels of enlightenment as well. So you progress on the path, you've built this skillful sense of self, you're starting to let go some of your identification with the khandhas. And then when you get up to it's like the third level of enlightenment, you might have let go of all your attachment to the khandhas, but actually there's still a sense of clinging there. There's still a sense of clinging to maybe this experience of enlightenment. There's a sense of clinging to the path. And this essentially what they say this comes from is what we call avidya, or a fundamental misrepresentation of the way that reality actually is. And so again, we just keep using this perceptual inference of non-self for all phenomena, for all existence, all experience. We keep doing this with everything, even to the experience of enlightenment. And the more we continue to do this, this gets rid of the I in the feeling of I am. And then even questions about existence or non-existence, because, you know, if one was enlightened, they'd still probably feel I exist in some kind of way. This being would see all these things as just arising and passing away. So this is getting rid of the sense of the am in the I am. And so I'll wrap it up here. I've probably gone too long. So sorry about that. So the idea here is that, okay, while the Buddha unequivocally said that everything is not self, he never really made any metaphysical claims that there was a self or there was no self. And what the idea is that what he's trying to do is trying to get us to let go of our attachment to the self, to the khandhas, because this causes us some suffering. All the skillful and unskillful action, this is the framework that leads us towards nibbana, or actually gets us more entrenched in dukkha. And selves and not selves have to fit into that structure of action of karma. And the question is, when is a perceptual inference of self-skillful karma? And when is a perceptual inference of not self-skillful karma? And when are they not skillful? And what leads to our long-term welfare and happiness? So the idea here, again, is that the self or not self is just a useful strategy that we use. And sometimes we use it, sometimes we pick it up, sometimes we put it down, just depending on what's actually going to lead to our long-term welfare and happiness. We use the aggregates to develop these things like morality, the jhanas. This builds the prerequisite conditions. And this will eventually show us that even the refined happiness that we might get out of something like this is just impermanent. And this gives us a solid foundation for actually letting go this more deeper sense of self. Solid foundation for developing right view as well. And then once you use this non-self-reflection, it allows you to let go of all phenomena. It's fabricated, unfabricated, conditioned, unconditioned. None of that really matters anymore. If you've got to this point, you've actually let go of everything. You've let go of selves, you let go of non-self, you let go of all strategies. None of it really matters anymore because you've reached liberation. And that's how that works. So with that, sorry if I went over time, but yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah. So thank you, Kevin. And we'll now go to our very distinguished visitor, Yenyi, who's a monk from the Dharma from Mountain in Taiwan. And not only just us here at M3CS are excited to have him in Melbourne, but also the Dharma drum community in Melbourne has been very excited by Yenyi's presence. He's also studying with Kai at the Yangming Jiaotong University in Taiwan, and his interest lies in integrating discussion of Buddhist practice, psychological space, and Maslow's theory. Over to you, Yenyi.
Yeah, thank you, Monima. And I'm happy in this, in Melbourne. Actually, when I was a lay people, I major is biology, and it's plant morphology. So in Melbourne, I'm very happy. I see a lot of different plant animal here, and very beautiful. Yeah, so I feel I can feel a very big sense of space in here. Yeah, in Taiwan, because they have a lot of very big building, we can now expand our sense of space. So this place is very suitable to meditation because we can open our mind directly. And this place is where I come from in Taiwan. It's Damazhuang Mount. It's a very beautiful place. If you will come to Taiwan, maybe I can take you to visit our place. My topic is Buddhist practice and psychological distance. And how do we describe a person with compassion and wisdom? We can think about that. We also describe them, they have long-term vision, right? Sometimes no short-sighted, and have a big heart, and caring for all sentient beings. So it may be mentioned a mental space, because we feel this world look like have a very big mental space. So why a person he practice some method for a long time will have the big mental space? I want to need to find this idea, understand this idea. Yeah. And in the relationship between Buddhist practice and the sense of time space, everybody know in Buddhist have the concept of reincarnation. So if you remember what time you born and you image what time you will die, we'll find we have a timeline to arrangement our memory. Yeah, maybe some people is placed in the left hand, future in the right hand, or some people is future in front of them and the past in back of them. And when we receive the concept of reincarnation, we will extend the timeline, and the past also extend. So it's also about the mental distance. And some sutra tell me how to visualize it and experience the infinity time and space, especially in Mahayana Buddhism sutra. Sometimes when I read this sutra, can you understand some very big sutra? It always repeat the same thing. Repeat again. And some sutra say we have another world. It's far away, and how people in there, and what Buddha in there, and what is the Buddha told in there, and from this place far away, like this, always repeat. So sometimes, if you this is your work, you want to read off them, sometimes you will feeling very boring. Yeah, because repeat. But if you have the patience to read them to the end, like me, or fine, I expand our sense of time and space. I have expand our mental space. It's very quite good feeling. Yeah, so this the beginning of why I have this idea. I want to combine this. And then my question is how to use the sense of time and the space to present a practitioner's state of meditation, and compassion and the vows to help all sentient beings also relate to the sense of time and the space. And the third is how about the presentation of the sense of time and the space from egocentric to selfless. So I find a psychological distance theory called control level theory. Yeah, he mentioned when we use a cause, source is more concrete. If we use the distance source, it's abstract. And they have 4 dimensions about our thinking. One is the temporal distance. So something near us is very close. Something past and something future, non-future, and more far, more distance. And also in spatial distance. Sometimes we think people nearby us is very close. Sometimes some people is in the overseas, is far away. We also use this mental distance in the spatial distance. And the social distance is about self in the center and intimate people. You can image the intimate people. You will find they were very close to us, and the friend, and maybe your classmate, you know, doesn't know them a lot, and the public people. You have the social distance. We arrange them. And the fourth is the haphazardly distance. It's about if something close to us, it may be it have a high chance to happen, but long-term distance is low chance to happen, like this. So we will focus in the social distance, like this. And I want to try to combine this distance with Maslow's hierarchy theory. So this original Maslow's theory, and this Kaufman modulate it like this. So we can think the self, when we kill self, is maybe our safety, body safety in the center. And the intimate person is something about belonging and the love. Intimate people we love is very important. Belong. And also in friends. And in a group, in our group, maybe in company, maybe in we have my group, maybe bigger than friend cycle. Is like this. It's important to self-esteem. Yeah. And the upstream level is quite important in public people. Maybe we can use the Buddha story. Do you know when the Buddhist is in the exploration time, when he was a very young man, he adventure to the city, and then he find the death, sick, all in the city. Everyone are suffering, and he arise a very deep compassion. You want to save all of them. So it's about the love. So he have a vow. You want to save all sentient beings, like this. Okay. So we can understand in this system, we can understand why the people with the compassion, the wisdom, have a long-term vision, not short-sighted, and have a big heart and something. So we also can predict the value. Something about safety or self is sense of security, sexual enjoyment, health, and the connection is be recognized, be trusted, friendship, and something. And the ST is about respected, affirm self-respected, and something like this. And love about compassion and the others. And the purpose is wisdom and others. So they have a distance. Maybe you can think about when you feel non-security, the sense of security, you will feel very short sense of the space, right? And when you feel the compassion, you have the big sense of the space. Yeah, different emotion, different feeling, have the different sense of the space. Yeah. And then I want to let our meditation student understand this way, because in Chan school, always talking about not to attach the experience about samadhi or dhyana. It's very dangerous, but it's very difficult to tell your student not to attach them, because they are very important goal in his mind. So I want to use the other way to tell them we can have another system about the values change, and you can always awareness use best to that. So they have a different life value. Some is positive, some is negative. So I let my student or participant select and rank the 5 most important positive and the negative values from the list of values, and evaluate from themselves which key and the values belong to the Maslow's theory of needs, then part the relative space, spatial and distance, and the relative influence of each value, and experience the concept of the sense of space. Repeat 1 to 3 step after meditation, and have an interview. It's very complex, but if you see the picture, it's very easy. Yeah. So we can see some something about his body, health, family, accomplishment, and the others. Each have the different sense of space. The circle, small or big, is the weak or strong. So before meditation, the meditation method is about the sense of space. I teach them to observe your sense of space. Yeah, it's a method. So we can find after meditation, the closely value or feeling becomes small, and some value have long distance appear. Then this, yeah, just 10 or 15 minutes meditation. And they wrote the values in the Maslow's theory. And this is before meditation, you can see there is value. Yeah, it's almost on the first 3 level. But after meditation, yeah, the base 3 level, there have no values. But up 3 level, have some value appear. Yeah, like this. So maybe we can have the hypothesis that is in the sense of time and the space. If a lot of value near our body is more selfish. And if a lot of value have long distance, we maybe call more selfless. Okay. So at the beginning, the value of close range made the partitional sense of time and the space short. Yeah. When we have a lot of possession, wandering, we will feel we have a very short sense of space. So in the process of Buddhist practice, the close range value of the practitioner will become small and less. Yeah. And long distance value will become apparent, while also extending the psychological distance. And we can also think the compassion and the vows, because it's about the public people. So when we vow to help all sentient beings, we also build in the distance value. Yeah. So then I want to describe the selfless and mystical experience. Our founder, Master Zhen say, some people, they deny meditation anymore, but some people like great politician, artists, and scientists may also enter the experience of the bigger self or mystical experience. And Maslow also say people who enter into self-actualization are more likely to experience mystical experience. Yeah. And Master Zhen meditation theory have 4 steps. First is scattered mind and the concentration mind, unified mind. The unified mind is about unity with the universal. So we see a lot of meditation study or psychedelic study. Also, often see the fusion with the university, have a big one like this. Or in Buddha's tradition, this is samadhi or dhyana. And the fourth steps is no mind. It's about emptiness only, no self. So must say unity between the internal and the external, as if already seen in infinite time and space, free and unrestricted experience, such feeling and the states of mind and can easily be mistaken for enlightenment. Yeah. So it looks like this, if fusion together. Okay. And no mind, the important thing is the infinity space, sense of space and time disappear. Maybe should the some in phenomenology is about the void shouting, or in Theravada forest schools belong Kevin. Yeah. Some of masters say the world is exploding. Yeah, so it's in other words is the time and the space disappear, or we put down the concept of time and space. Yeah. So it looks like this. The bigger circle, the infinity disappear. Yeah. So the conclusion is from the perspective of the sense of time and space. Practitioners first expand the sense of time and space until they become one with the infinity sense of time and space, and finally let go of the infinity mental space that merges with the self, and then experience no self, emptiness, or dependent origination. That's the complete experience, process of no self that Buddhism calls. Yeah, thank you.
So our last speaker for today, before we move on to the discussion, is Kai. Kai is a professor of philosophy from Taiwan and is currently visiting our center for a semester. He's working on a book on Daoist philosophy with a focus on self and personal identity. And he's going to speak to this problem of from self to no self from a different Daoist perspective.
Thank you, Monima. So I was telling Kevin that today is at the peak of my career. I'm the same platform with two, masters. So my role here is more like to provide a Daoist contrast to the Buddhist, but I found so much resonance in their talk. So you can see I more like present the text of the Daoist. So when I'm writing the book, Tim asking me who is my reader, and I realized that my reader is Otto Ben, his son, 3 years old. So I mean, Tim would tell us a story about his son, and it's so profound, turns out. So I just cannot get rid of Otto. So one scenario is that Tim was sending Otto to the kindergarten for maybe the first time. And of course, Otto did not want his father to leave. And so he would drag him to a corner, kind of a little bit distant from other people. And the father monk, Tim, was very observant, seeing that, Otto was developing a sense of autonomy, self. And then he was asking in tears, who is going to look after me? So, and that is very profound, no? So in the text of Zhuangzi, the Daoist philosopher, there is a scenario, a dialogue between two friends. So Mr. Transport and Mr. Berry. So they are friends, and one day it's raining for 10 days, and Berry is kind of poor, and Mr. Transport know that his friend is kind of poor and kind of raining for 10 days is difficult. So he prepares some rice, some food, and bring it over to his friend. And in distance, he was hearing his friend kind of singing and kind of half singing, half weeping, singing something like Father, Mother, Heaven, Man. So, and then, so the Mr. Transport entered the room and found out, yeah, he was in misery, singing like that. So he was asking me what's going on. So then, yeah, I can read it here. I've been thinking about what could have caused me to reach, Mr. Berry was saying, to reach this extreme state, and I can find no answer. My mother and father would surely never wish to impoverish me like this. Heaven covers all equally. Earth supports all equally. So how could heaven and earth be so partial as to single me out for impoverishment? I search for some doer of it, but cannot find anything. Right. So, and yet I'm in this extreme state. All the same, this must be what is called fate. Right. So obviously, yeah, this is a human condition. So when Otto was asking me who is going to look after me, so Zhuangzi, you have a conversation with him when he grew up, when he developed a sense of self, and there's much work to do. But Zhuangzi will talk to him and say, yeah, who is going to take care of me? And we have to ask who is who here, and who and what is me, kind of to address this issue. And this kind of goes through the entire book of Zhuangzi, I think. So, and Zhuangzi did look for God, right, the creator of things. It's very natural. If you are in that kind of existential condition, you will see, why am I here? So he has quite a lot of discussion about trying to find the trace of God or the creator of things. And there are places where you can find like he's thinking like there's that blacksmith who make a metal into some kind of object, and maybe God is something like that, like a blacksmith, right? But in the end, I think you can only find this kind of process and transformation like in nature. But he did go through this kind of process of finding one. So I'll skip it. And interestingly, he also has a kind of a similar reasoning with John Locke. Locke was trying to prove the existence of God. And the way he tried to prove it is try to find what I have here in me, like in my mental life. There is like, free will. And then you can kind of infer from what you have to the existence of God, something like that, that kind of line of reasoning. So in the paragraph, Locke was saying something like, my movement is not caused just by blind matter. Must be, it's a free action somehow. And it's very natural to feel it that way. And from there, you can kind of infer that there must be some higher being who has similar feature. That's his line of reasoning. And Zhuangzi has similar kind of thinking. But it's interesting that he has doubts about free will. So there is a very interesting paragraph. I read it. There's a dialogue between Penumbra and the shadow. He has all this fictional dialogue, all make up. So Penumbra said to the shadow, first you were walking, then you were standing still. First you were sitting, then you were upright. Why can't you decide on a single course of action? And the shadow responds, do I depend on something to make me as I am? That's what I depend on something else? Is my dependence like the case of the snake's skin or the cicada's shell? How would I know why I'm so or not so? So here, it's really, you can sense that, I mean, the snake, move by depending on his skin and the friction with the ground. So it make a move. And let's say, so my movement, right, does it have to depend on something? So supposedly my movement, my behavior must be dependent on my mental states, beliefs, and desires. Right? But then you can kind of imagine the dialogue will continue to ask, then my mental states, beliefs, and desires, do they have to depend on some other things? And continue, you can ask. Right? And this very interesting paragraph actually is situated in a series of discussion. And this is what goes before that dialogue. Right? And this describes the mental states. Keep going on and keep going away. But then among these ongoing mental states, Zhuangzi was kind of saying that there is a true master in the mental state. Yeah, you can translate it as a self. Right. So maybe the mental states, they all have to depend on a self, on a true master who control them. Right. So, but then what is that? What is the true master? Yeah. And then he said, I can find no trace of him. He has identity, but no form. Something like that. I can feel that it's there, but I cannot see it. So in the end, what is that? And I talked about this last time. So the dream of the butterfly, he continued to ask what that is. So this guy is very intellectually, very, very rigorous. So then he realized that, because in the wildest dreaming of a butterfly, not knowing myself, so that self, that true master, turned out to be something else, like a butterfly in the dream. So, so it has a definite identity that turns out to be an illusion. So then in the end, if my movement has to depend on mental states on a self, on a true master, but that is suspicious. All this line of reasoning. Okay. And then you can have other paragraphs saying something similar, but it's much shorter. We temporarily get involved in something or other and proceed to call it myself. But how can we know if what we call self has any self to it? And the perfect man has no self. This is very short. And the utmost person has no definite identity. So going back to Otto, so bad news for him is that so no creator of things to take care of me, and father and mother would get old and one day they would die. But that is good news. Sorry. But good news is there is nothing about me to be taken care of. So that's good news. Yeah, very dark. I'm sorry, Otto. But somehow, but there is still a human person who is me, capable of feeling, thinking, and experiencing, still living in the world. Even though there is no self, still I have to go through my life. How do I live my life? How do I face my death? Still, some issues still there. So, and Zhuangzi, I think, has more to say from there, how to live. So, So two roots. One is intellectual, philosophical understanding. You try to figure out intellectually. Yeah, no, definitely identity corresponding to self. And in the issue of how to live, having all the mental states, all the behavior, that issue, I discussed it in the context of personal identity. And the time is limited, so I would kind of skip it, but the basic idea is that Mark Johnson has an interesting theory of personal identity, saying that the kind of person I am would depend on how I judge what kind of person I am. So personal identity is kind of dependent on my judgment and response. So it's like color, the kind of color a flower has, kind of dependent on my response to the color of the flower. So personal identity is something similar. So I think the identity of being a father is something like that. So if you are not loving, you don't consider yourself as a father, then you are not a father. You see, the self-regarding attitude is important to be in the identity of a father. So there is a sense of personal identity in that. And Johnson himself has an idea that so with that theory we can kind of survive death because I can self-identify my future interest with other people's interest. So if they continue to live, I will be survived by them. That kind of very intriguing theory, which I think I can use to interpret one very intriguing passage in Zhuangzi. Zhuangzi said there is a Mr. Dai, there is a person, he sometimes thinks he's a cow, sometimes thinks that he's a horse. And such understanding are most genuine and most reliable. Right, so this guy is really thinking he's a horse, he's a cow. So that has to be taken seriously. And I think Mark Johnston's idea can make sense of that. So by identifying oneself as cow and horse, you identify yourself with nature. Right? It does not just mean cows and horse, it's a representative of nature. So there is this kind of person in Daoist worldview that you self-identify yourself with nature. Right, so that's a kind of a skillful self that, Kevin steal my title. So I mean, Zhuangzi is doing some kind of that kind of a recommendation. Right. So, and then you with that kind of understanding, you identify yourself with nature. Then we probably can understand some other intriguing passage in Zhuangzi. I can read this one. This one is one of my favorites. For you, you may hide a boat, something you value, in a ravine or a net in a swamp, thinking it is secure. But in the middle of the night, a mighty one, so that's a thought is Berryman, might come along and carry it away on his back, unknown to you, in your slumber. When the smaller is hidden within the larger, there remains some place to which it can escape, but to hide the world in the world. So then there is nowhere for it to escape to. Then it has a vast realness of a thing eternal. So supposedly you hide something valuable about, and then, it's like your wealth, your health, your family, it might get broken apart overnight. So then where are you going to find something secure? Right? And to hide the world is supposedly the most precious, right? Everything you have. And then you hide in the world. So you don't have to hide, you already have it. already there. So yeah, so that has to do with your self-identification with the world. So then you have some very mysterious saying from the Zhuangzi saying, heaven and earth are born together with me, and the 10,000 things and I are one, that kind of saying. And the fat of the tree is exhausted in making kindling, but the fire moves on, is ending unknown. Yeah. So the first kind of sentence, that's why I want Kevin and Yenyi to answer the practice, how they understand that kind of statement. I have no idea. And then 2,300 years ago, Zhuangzi was already paying so much attention to skill. And then he has the most precise, detailed description of how an expert, like a cook, then dissect a cow. Right. And then, yeah, you can read by yourself, but yeah, perception, understanding have come to a stop, and the spirit moves, etc. So I don't move governed by my perception and understanding, etc. So, and interestingly, the cooks was saying that what he likes is not the skill, but Tao. And Tao goes advanced than skill. But he's making the assimilation of Tao to skill. So that by saying that he placed the skill at a very high level. And supposedly skill has a strong connection to a sense of self. Your sense of self is minimized in a very highly skillful performance. So I take all this, like the skills and meditation is part of it as a kind of skill, the practice of self. So that's why I say your topic is my topic. And okay, I'll start with this mysterious meditation practice. They have the reports of their experience of meditation. So again, I present this paragraph and ask the two masters on behalf of you. So there is this woman crook back. She is an expert of meditation, and she was telling Nambo Zigui how she teach another person to meditate. So I began explaining and kept at him for 3 days. And after that, he was able to put the world outside himself. When he had put the world outside himself, I kept at him for 7 days more. And after that, he was able to put things outside himself. When he had put things outside himself, I kept at him for 9 days more. And after that, he was able to put life outside himself. After he had put life outside himself, he was able to achieve the brightness of dawn. And when he had achieved the brightness of dawn, he could see his own aloneness. After he had managed to see his own aloneness, he could do away with past and present. And after he had done away with past and present, he was able to enter where there is no life and no death. So please, if this is what's going on here. So yeah, so this is a Daoist text that partly I could try to understand it in terms of philosophical work, and partly they make all these notes of their meditation experience, and that I have no idea. So, but obviously they are doing things both ways. Thank you.
Let's thank all the speakers again for these lovely talks. I mean, Kai has already thrown a lot of challenges for the two masters to answer. I want to make a small observation and then first invite the people here or people on Zoom to join in the discussion. and then perhaps at the end come back to answering these questions. Just a small observation I wanted to make was something I noticed in all the three talks, that, you know, when I was thinking about from self to no self, the no sounded negative. So it was loss of something. But here it seems to be very much so expanding and strengthening something. We started with Kevin talking about it. You know, you need to expand and strengthen the sense of self. And not self has to be understood, you know, not as losing anything, but just perhaps, you know, moving between these two. And then Yenyi talking about expanding the self, you know, the no self as expanding space and time. That seemed to me, again, to be gaining a different perspective. And then the way Kai talked about it, thinking about expanding interests, you know, beyond oneself to, you know, being able to identify with interests of all beings. The only thing, you know, kind of losing oneself came in the very last thing that Kai's, I mean, to my mind at least, but correct me if I'm wrong, came in thinking about, you know, losing oneself when one is in the flow, or, you know, skilled master, just doing something. But is that really losing ourselves? Anyway, I thought it was a short remark, so I better stop and invite people if they have questions in the room or online.
Yeah, I think this is a question for you, Kevin, but maybe it relates to other things that people were saying. If the original driver for Buddhism is the sensation of suffering, dukkha, and that comes from attachment, and if you think about the self in terms of attachment, right, myself is the people I love, the things I care about, my projects. So someone else's projects, if they're not my projects, that's not a part of myself. Someone else's car is not part of myself. But if someone runs into my car, that's an attack on me because I care about my car, you know, this kind of thing. And then you think, and maybe this maybe is moving more into a Daoist conception of the big self, but if the solution is to not be partial and care about my friends and my family, but all sentient creatures, everything, equally, that makes the problem of suffering worse, right? Because now it's not just my car or my friends or my pets or my forest, but everyone's forest and everyone's friends and everyone's family. And that doesn't get rid of suffering. It you know, it ratchets it up. So there's a sense in which caring about nothing and caring about everything is in some sense the same, because it removes the differentiation between what I care. I don't distinguish between these things and those things, right? But there's another sense in which there's every difference in the world between caring about nothing and caring about everything. So I guess maybe I don't mean this to sound aggressive, but I've never really understood the attraction of the fundamental driver here, which is getting rid of attachment. Because yes, it gets rid of suffering, but attachment is also the thing that generates joy and love. So I fully understand the driver to say, don't care just about your friends and your family and the things that you grow up with, right? Enlarge the circle of care about everything. I understand that, but that's a different thing from don't get attached to anything. I don't know if any of that makes any sense. It's just a reflection on a Friday afternoon. But.
Yeah, that's a really poignant observation, Tim. And I think the Because the first thing I'd say about this is that, well, part of the project of not attaching to things is that there are things outside of our control in some kind of way. So this expanded circle, it is totally outside of the things that we actually can control. And so if we identify with that in some way, then yeah, we are going to have some kind of suffering. And then also, likewise, the things, inside the thing that is the self, if I'm attaching and I'm identifying to this, yeah, I'm going to have some kind of suffering there as well. So it's about seeing those things that we really don't have any control over, and we don't identify with them. This is the thing that is essentially what the Buddhists are saying, is that this is the thing that is going to alleviate of our suffering. And if we don't have this kind of attachment to these broader things, actually we can feel compassion for things without measure or without directedness in some way. I think that's maybe Yenyi can speak to this a little bit more. This is when it becomes more expansive as well, because it's not, well, I like these particular things, or I don't like these particular things. Because we're not identifying with this element of control with them, then we actually can be expansive in that kind of way. So as opposed to expanding ourselves through this compassionate mind state of that we in some way are connected with all phenomena in life, we also see that we're not controlling all phenomena in life as well. So that would be the way that I would think we would alleviate the suffering in this way. Does that answer, at least get a bit to it, or did I miss something? Or
I mean, yeah, it does. I guess I want to put the issue in terms of preferences. Yeah, I don't control everything, but I have preferences, and I feel suffering it, I think, within the Buddhist framework. Tell me if I'm wrong, but what I hear is that I suffer when my preferences aren't satisfied in some way, right? So if I prefer that the Amazon not be cut down, I can't control it, but I suffer if it. And this, I mean, one of his original question was, how does the goal state here differ from depersonalization, or a kind of, I don't care. I have no preferences about the state of the world. The world is how the world is, right? I'm completely indifferent. Now, I could be completely indifferent, but I don't want to be. So I guess the challenge is the suggestion that we should be indifferent. I don't hear you saying that, but as long as I'm not indifferent, I suffer when my preferences are frustrated, even though I can't control them.
cool. So I think this in some way gets to what I was talking about building this skillful sense of self. There's these prerequisite qualities that we actually need to develop, and one of those is kindness. So from the Buddhist perspective, we have these what they call the sublime mind states of loving kindness or altruistic kindness, compassion, and altruistic joy towards the goodness of others, and then equanimity. We call this upekkha. Now, upekkha, sometimes that can be the thing that looks like indifference in some way. But what we say is that we actually have to have these mind states infused with each other. So although you have equanimity there, it has to be imbued with the compassion and the loving kindness as well. It has to be there. If you have equanimity without the loving kindness, yeah, you're indifferent. If you have loving kindness without the equanimity, yeah, you're falling into your preferences in some kind of way. So these things, they do need to be imbalance in some way. So this is why we say, you know, you have to, you know, well, this is one interpretation that, you know, we have to build up this skillful sense of self first. And if we do this in this healthy kind of way, and it's like, well, look, I've developed this action of you know, generous actions in this way, and I can be generous to, you know, these people that are close to me. I can be generous to these people that are far away from me. The preference doesn't really matter anymore. Obviously, I'm probably going to look after my own family a lot more than I do those far away. But if we built this healthy sense of self up first, and then we can actually start to go, well, okay, well, I'm starting to see my preferences in this way. And again, there's this idea of like, we're moving towards a higher sense of happiness in this way. So it really does have to be imbued with all these other qualities. And then essentially, then you can actually start to let go and be equanimous to all these different things without being apathetic and you know, being too worried about your preferences, because it includes everyone. You know, can look after your family just as well as you look after the rest of the world as well. So yeah, but it's the intractable Buddhist problem. So I do recognize it as sad. So do you want to add anything to that, or?
Maybe I can give a simple example. Sometimes we feel suffering if maybe the relationship between mother and the son. I'm the son. Mother do some things I don't think it's good mother. I attach this. What is the good mother? And what is the good relationship between mother and son? So it's one kind the dependence origination. And so we are suffering because we can control our mother, right? And when we realize what is no self, we understand the son is dependence origination, mother also like this. We can say easily, mother is not only mother, is someone's daughter, someone's wife, other brother, sister's mother. So he's a lot of identity. And when I realize no self, I don't want to control anything or control his her behavior. But in this time, my mother also consider I am his son, I am her son. Yeah, so my behavior is from what he think I am. And I understand how I become a good son, and he will have no suffering. It's not from self aspect, it's from her aspect. So it's one way to understand what is no self. Yeah, okay.
Other questions in the room or Zoom? Emma? Yeah.
Thanks. So I'm wondering, similarly to my question that I asked to Jay last week, if you could speak a little bit about the role of the community in an individual's, movements between self and no self. So like all these things that we were hearing about in the last hour or so, how possible are they, or how dangerous might they be if they're pursued by a lonely individual in an individualist society, like looking only towards their own experience and not having a sense of community that shares this kind of path with them?
It's usually us lonely men that ordain as monks as well. So, hi, do you want to?
Yeah, this is a tough one.
So, while there is this aspect there that what you're trying to do when you're, doing these kind of practices and you're trying to go for liberation, while this is very much an introspective project, obviously you're trying to see through the self, it really is actually, the bottom line is the practicalities of it. It's based in a community. I live in communities. I live with a lot of people. I have to try my very, very best not to get angry with them and not to have them annoy me, and have to just try to be kind to them, because this is sort of part of the project. These are some of the qualities that I'm actually trying to develop. So even though I'm trying to do something where I'm essentially just looking about something about my own experience, it's like, obviously my own experience has others in it. Like, I can't get away from that at all. So others are very, very important because they are actually a part of our experience as well. And so there's so many things on there, and Monima and I have talked about this before. It's like actually this development of values in the community and having this shared sense of social understanding between each other. This is actually something that can support your practice in some way, because you're trying to develop these wholesome emotions in some way. So even though you might be starting to let go the sense of self, again, like Yenyi was saying, it's potentially expanding in this way. And so, yeah, so and probably the last thing I'd say about that is, so actually one thing that the Buddha actually said is that what he said, like a Kalyana Mitta, which is a good friend. This is the whole of the Buddha's path, the whole of the holy life, he said. So this aspect of being interrelated and having friends and having people there around you that you actually do look after and care for, this is really important. There's all these, we've got all these like ridiculous amounts of rules where it's like, I have to look after all these people. Like Yenyi comes, I have to do specific things with him and those kinds of things. So it's like, we've got to look after each other. It's like, we're wandering around in our strange clothes as we are. We've got to look out for each other. So there's a social aspect there. And so while this kind of path to liberation, you're letting go of this sense of self, but it can really actually start to include things as well. So, yeah.
So, first to briefly to Tim, the very tough question about the preferences and to have a close connection. I think I was reminded of Zhuangzi's wife when she died, that paragraph. So, for Daoist, the kind of emotions or the kind of you are feeling close to your loved ones, those are real, undeniable. So that's the first level you definitely have to have. But then you have all the joy and all the suffering, right down there. But then, he would have a second layers of reflection. When there is joy, that's fine. But when there is suffering, that is not easy. And then he developed ways of dealing with it. Right? So then he broadened his perspective, etc. And in that kind of perspective, the sense of self or the kind of connection become minimized. So they are these layers. And community, I think for Daoist, it's I think when I read Zhuangzi, friendship turns out to be, I think, among the highest value somehow. I was surprised to find out. There are paragraphs describing how several people, they become friends. And they become friends when they realize that they each other have similar kind of understanding of reality. Then they become real friends, etc. And the first story we encountered, it was a friend waiting for 10 days and thinking of his friend is suffering And he went there, and yes, he was suffering. So he was. So that's a kind of subtext. You know, the suffering is unescapable, but luckily we have friends. So friends is kind of community.
Thank you. I think on that note, we should bring an end to today's proceedings, and let's thank our speakers again.